We're lucky enough to have here with us today the novelist P.D. James, the creator of Adam Dalgliesh, who celebrates her 90th birthday today. P.D. James, Phyllis, welcome, and thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, it's good to be here and to talk to you.
You didn't start off as a writer, did you? You worked in the NHS, I think, and also then as a civil servant subsequently.
Well, yes, but I knew from very early childhood that I wanted to be a writer. It was really for some circumstances, the war, and then having a family to support because I had a sick husband, needing a safe job, all those sort of things. So I was a late starter. But I was in the health service, I think, when I wrote my first one, and then on the Home Office, in the Home Office.
And did those, perhaps day jobs is the wrong word, but those other jobs, did they then feed into the fiction that you wrote?
Very much so, Sarah, yes. I think I was extremely fortunate. And in fact, I got, as it were, a novel out of all those experiences, especially Shout for a Nightingale about nurse training when I was in the health service, and then Death of an Expert Witness when I was responsible administratively, not of course scientifically, for the forensic science laboratories. That was a very useful experience. Yes. I was in the police department of the Home Office. Very considerate of me to put me there, I think.
And in Adam Dalgliesh, who is the character for whom you're best known, you've created one of the most famous detectives in fiction, I think, probably. And in some ways, he's very much in the traditional mould of detectives in fiction. You know, his first wife died, he's very introverted. But then in other ways, he differs completely. He's a poet, and at the end of your most recent Dalgliesh novel, The Private Patient, it seems as if he has a chance of happiness. Do you think that this complexity, there's two sides to him, is why people have taken him to their hearts in the way that they have?
I think so. He's reticent. That was one of the qualities I gave him. I mean, he's got the obvious qualities of a hero. He's very brave, he's courageous, he's not foolhardy. I wanted him to be compassionate, but not sentimental. I wanted him to be deeply private. And I think people felt there's a part of him you never quite know, and that makes him more interesting.
Do you identify with him?
I think I do, to the extent that naturally I wanted to like him, because I hoped when I created him, whatever that may mean really, that he might go on through several books. So he had to be someone I would like to be with. But so I gave him the qualities I personally admire in people, and that made him very bright. And people say, well, there aren't many policemen who are poets. Well, there aren't, but there's no reason why one shouldn't be.
And you've also had a couple of outings for your female private detective, Cordelia Gray. Where did she come from?
I suppose if she came from anywhere, there's quite a lot of her in my younger daughter, but Jane would deny that utterly. She would say she would never get involved in anything as dangerous as that. So I think, again, I honestly believe, Sarah, that we get most of our characters from ourselves, things we've experienced, things we remember, emotions we remember. I look to myself, really. I look to the young Phyllis James, really, for Cordelia.
And as well as, obviously you're best known for your crime fiction, but you've also had a couple of outings into science fiction, and probably most famously The Children of Men, which was made into a film, Children of Men.
I hate to think of it as science fiction, but if one were sort of ascribing it to a genre, that is undoubtedly the genre that one would choose. It's very different from the other books. I can see the influence of the crime novels there, but when I had that idea, which I got from reading a scientific article which pointed out how the human race is now much less fertile than it was, I realized that there was a wonderful plot there, a story to be told, but it really wasn't very suitable to twist it, to make it into a detective story. So I wrote it as a straightforward novel.
And is it something that you consider going back to, science fiction?
If I had an idea that powerful, I never have felt that I've got to, as it were, extend myself, do something better than crime. I've never felt that. I very much respect the detective story. But still, if I had a plot, an idea came that wasn't suitable for it, then I would write another kind of book.
And you talked about detective fiction. You were born in 1920, which was really the same year as the golden age of detective fiction was born.
It was, absolutely.
Yes, it's quite fortuitous.
In a sense, it's almost the beginning of the golden age of the 30s, the 20s and the 30s.
And in many ways, your novels are in that similar detective fictional mode.
Yes, they are. They're written very much within the conventions, you know, the central mysterious death, the closed circle of suspects, the detective who comes in rather like an avenging deity to solve it, and the logical solution which the reader should be able to arrive at himself or herself from the clues. It's a bit of a straitjacket, really, but I think it's fascinating to see what you can do with it. And what remarkable novels are written within those conventions. I think some people find the conventions are liberating rather than inhibiting of the creative imagination. And to say that one can't be creative within this structure is as silly as to say you never have great poetry, which is a sonnet, where you're strictly limited, as you know, for 14 lines and to a strict rhyming sequence. And I think some of the greatest poetry ever written is a sonnet form. So I don't find it restricting.
What do you make then of the more bloody, gory crime writing that we see today?
I know that they're aiming at realism, and certainly we can do with novels which are probably more realistic in a violent world, but I think this emphasis on sadistic murdering of women and psychopathic murderers, and it's always women they rip up, if you've noticed. Occasionally, it's unfortunate gays that they are prejudiced against, but on the whole, it's women. It's violence. It's sexual violence against women, and I think I don't like it. I can't read it, and I certainly wouldn't be able to write it.
At the end of last year, you guest edited the Today programme, now quite famously, and you gave the BBC Director General Mark Thompson quite a grilling, to the extent that Evan Davis said afterwards that you should be presenting the programme rather than just guest editing it. Have you been tempted at all by a late life move into journalism?
I do love radio. I do love radio, and I was very grateful when they asked me to edit it, and I took it very seriously. And did in fact edit it and said who I wanted to see, and decided to have some poetry there, 3 poems, which I thought was a great idea. And I would certainly like to be involved, but I mean, I'm 90 and I'm not going to have another career now, Sarah. Let's face it. I'm not really. But if I'm invited to do radio, I'm always very glad.
And you started writing in your mid-30s, and your first novel, which was Cover Her Face, came out in 1962, I think.
Yes, it was.
And that means you've been writing and publishing for over half a century now.
Absolutely.
Are you still writing?
Yes.
And
yes.
do you ever see
I'm
yourself
doing something
stopping?
at the moment. It is a novel, but it's very different, and it's going to be much shorter. And then I shall find out what energy I've got. And whether I can start a new Dalgliesh. But I hate the thought of dying in the middle of a book. And after all, when you're 90, you can't be sure. So it's a bit of a risk, and I would hate that. I'm sure I'd think, oh God, I haven't finished that book. Somebody will try and finish it, and it'll be awful. But I think it would be nice to do one more, but who can tell about the future?
Today is your 90th birthday. What are you planning to do to celebrate?
Well, I'm going to have a great party, which will be lovely, given to me by my hardback publisher Faber, and also by Penguin, who paper the paperback publisher. It's going to be lovely. I'm really looking forward to it very much. I had the family party on the previous Saturday, when I had daughters, grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
The whole gamut.
That was great, really.
Well, PD James, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us.
It's been a great pleasure to talk to you, Sarah. Thank you very
Happy
much for
birthday.
having me.